the government is telling us that during the first 9 months, credit flow now is at 22.8 trillion rupees. The numbers seem to be suggesting that in comparison to 14.1 trillion in the same period in the previous fiscal, the suggestion being made is that credit flow is 1.6 times more than what was there in the previous fiscal. Now I want to understand, when credit flow is of this level, how does it augur for the economy? Do we say that, well, more people are taking loans? There is more money which is coming into the system, and therefore it is leading to more expenditure. Is that the cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, principally, a larger credit flow in the retail banking system is supposed to be good, not just for the banks, but also for the economy. The only thing we need to see is whether the demand for credit is being utilized for investment purposes or what you call as unproductive expenditure. If you and me are using credit cards for paying our household bills, as against or paying for rent, fixed expenses, as against putting that money in, I don't know, mutual fund stock or investing in land, something that I would have a return on, that's very different. So if I'm taking a loan to get a house, is an investment much more so than taking a credit instrument or a credit borrowing for your essential needs. So what happens is, when your incomes are stagnating or the incomes are not going up, the demand for credit would rise, banks would come in definitely, but the banks would also monitor where is this credit actually being utilized, so that, which is the key point here, credit shouldn't become debt.
That's the problem. Shouldn't become bad debt.
Yes. I mean, debt of any kind, and then bad debt would be the subsequent effect of that.
I think that's an important point that you flag off, Deepanshu, and because there's so many numbers that we can look at, and typically what business channels end up doing is that they only throw numbers at you. At Times of India, on this Times of India online platform, what we're trying to do is to make sense of those numbers for you. We don't want you to get confused if you look at any screen around you. We just want you to know exactly what are those 2-3 yardsticks, parameters on which you should be looking at this budget closely. And if a number is being thrown at you, what does that number really imply? So let's look at another number, Deepanshu. And all these numbers, I just want to tell all of you who may be waking up, maybe still waking up a little early, certainly in the North Indian parts of the country where there has been rains. Has it ever rained on a budget, Deepanshu? I was wondering.
Not that I can recollect. Last 10 years, not really.
Well, I tweeted to the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, and I was asking her if she could remember that if it had rained at any given point of time on a budget, and I wonder how she'd be looking at that. That's an omen. But look at this other number, which is constantly thrown by the Finance Ministry mandarins. The GST collection rising 10.4% to 1.72 trillion in January. At over 90,000 patent filings is highest in 2 decades. These are the two big broad headlines which are coming from the powers that be right now. 1.72 trillion growth, 10.4% is the growth which is being suggested, and it's now reached to 1.72 trillion in the month of January. Explain to us the story of GST collection. Why is it so very important? Why is it always called that it's the principal premise on which the story of New India is really being created?
I mean, GST has been, if you really look at as a policy experiment, there might have been questions asked at the time the way it was implemented, because India was still sort of recovering from the demonetization episode at the time. But overall, net, if you look at what's happened the last sort of 7 to 8 years, GST has been part of India's success story when it comes to indirect tax reform. And I would say that very carefully, because 80% of the tax weightage is relying in India on indirect taxes, which is asymmetrically quite disproportionate. Equally, by anyone who's buying those goods and buying salt, we'll just be paying almost the same tax. So that becomes, in the principal sense, a more regressive way of taxing the population. But India's had always a high indirect tax weightage, and the problem was the complexity of the tax system, which made investment more difficult. So GST has been definitely, if you look at tax buoyancy,
has it been the biggest game changer? Let me ask you.
Yes.
If we were to, let's say, if we were to track the